And I really want to thank you all for attending this evening. It's great that we have a bunch of people here. Let's see, we have, about 40 some, so we should be getting quite a few more people coming. But, we apologize that we're not having the celebration to the fall instead of the spring. In the spring, we thought we're just delaying the celebration. But eventually we were forced to acknowledge that our hope to gather in person was unrealistic. So we're happy that we're together now, be it virtually, and thank you all for joining us. A couple of housekeeping things. I mentioned about how you can swap between the views by what's above the pictures of the people. This is being recorded, so if you don't want to have video, you can go and click the stop video button, and then your video will not be available. So I want to take a moment to acknowledge that as we gather today, many of us are on the historic and contemporary lands of the Duwamish, Snoqualmish, and other Coast Salish people. We acknowledge the forced displacement of Native communities from this land. We thank them for their respectful stewardship of the land and honor their endurance through generations to the present. We are deeply appreciative of For Culture for sponsoring this awards celebration. I'm Alice Stenstrom. I'm the president of the AKCHO board, and I'd like to introduce the rest of the board, who I have the privilege of working with. It's really too bad if we're in person, they like stand up and they wave and, but we just have to make do. Erin Alcorn, Shelby Alham, Alicia Barnes, Kim Owens, Hillary Pittenger, and Virginia Wright. If you're interested in becoming more involved in AKCHO, there are lots of opportunities. For example, you could become a board member. You could volunteer to help us with social media or identifying advocacy concerns. If you have any ideas of how you'd like to get involved or just want to talk to somebody and have them help you, feel free to talk to any of the board members. Before we go any further, we have a little sort of somber thing to do. I want to stop and have us take a moment of silence in remembering AKCHO board member Judy Romeo, who passed away on February 4th. You may remember Judy was the person who handled all the logistics of the past several in-person AKCHO Awards celebrations. So we not only had to switch this whole thing around, but we also had new people taking on roles. So we've had a learning experience. So thank you for bearing with us in anything that may have seemed not so smooth. The Center for Wooden Boats will be hosting a celebration of Judy's life on Friday, November 20th. Please go to their website for more details and to register. AKCHO is very appreciative of the support from other King County organizations, in particular, Chieko Phillips, For Culture Heritage Program Director, Gumi Nakata, For Culture Heritage Program Support Specialist, Sarah Steen, King County Historic Preservation Program Landmarks Coordinator, and Allison Campbell, Washington State Historical Society Heritage Outreach Manager. At this time, Chieko Phillips, as I said, she's the For Culture Heritage Program Director, has a few words for us from For Culture. And we all know them. They're the organization that assists all of our other organizations in achieving their goals, and who we again thank for sponsoring this awards celebration. Chieko?
Yes. Hi, everyone. I hope everyone's having a great evening. Again, my name is Chieko Phillips, and I'm the Heritage Program Director at For Culture. We're so proud to be a sponsor for over many years for this annual awards program. And I'd like to start off with just thanking the AKCHO board for kind of flipping the script around, pivoting, and still gathering us together for this evening to celebrate during a year which has had many downs and twists and turns, from the lingering impacts of COVID. Right now, as we're kind of limping through election season, and of course, the really brutal and increased visibility of the racial violence in our country. So it's been a dark year. So it's great to have a moment to celebrate with one another. So I'd like to, of course, congratulate all the award winners that are here. Again, thank the AKCHO board. And also take a minute just to acknowledge that there are many other people on this call that either are family members that have nurtured some of the awardees' love and passion about heritage. There are also other volunteers, board members, staff members that make the heritage field vibrant and help to preserve and share our King County history and heritage. So I want to thank everyone else who's on the call as well. And thank you for what you do for our history in King County. My remaining time, two shameless plugs since I was given time. One would be we are launching our internship program for 2021. This year for next year, we'll launch the call this year to give folks plenty of time to submit applications for projects, since we are soliciting project proposals from organizations this year. There'll be more information coming out about that in the next few weeks. So if you have a digital project that could use the support from some graduate students, please keep an eye out for that internship call for proposals. And then secondly, this is just a general plea to please continue to share your needs with representatives at For Culture, at representatives at organizations like AKCHO, the Washington State Historical Society. There has an assessment out right now, but there'll be quite a few opportunities for you to provide feedback on what your organization needs as we continue to kind of recover and just live in the impacts of COVID-19 into 2021. So it's just a general plea that if you have time to take an assessment or respond to a call for feedback about what your organization needs right now, or what you as an individual heritage practitioner needs right now, I just hope you'll take the time to give us that feedback. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Chieko. And again, thank everybody at For Culture for all they do. Certainly make the county a better place because of the work you do. As Chieko mentioned, many projects happened throughout King County in 2019, and many people generously gave their time and talent to these projects. Thank you to all of you for what you do. Of course, you realize that makes the task of selecting who or what projects receives awards a very difficult task for the awards committee. And thank you, Pat Filer, for leading the committee. Committee people have given their time for many hours of keeping track of what's happening in the county. So Dee Carell and Walt, Bob Federley, Michael Kirschenbaum, Carol Medor, Barbara Nielsen, Kim Owens, Hillary Pittenger, and Alan Stein. So thanks for keeping tabs on what's happening across the county, reviewing all of the nominations, and carefully making some very difficult decisions. One last thank you goes out to J&E Awards, who, just so you know, in case you want to use them, is changing their name to J&C Trophies and Awards for producing the plaques that were mailed to the award recipients. So the awards celebration is going to be a little bit different format than what we've had for the in-person celebrations in the past. First, we're going to have a keynote speaker. That'll be followed by the announcement of the awards, and then an opportunity for award recipients, if they choose, and others to speak. And of course, you can always put things in the chat feature, which will be monitored. So now, Aaron, if you would introduce our keynote speaker.
Absolutely. I get the great honor to introduce Taya Cruz Uribe. And one of the things that's wonderful about having AKCHO and having awards is we get a chance to recognize good work, and also to take lessons whenever we can learn from one another, ways that we can operate our institutions a little bit better. As everyone has hinted to so far, 2020 has been, it's been a year. We have seen so many institutions, I think, really stretched, some to the breaking point, but some really stretched and struggling. But as a heritage practitioner, I really love to embrace institutions that understand their core value, understand the communities that they serve. And Taya definitely brings that in shovel loads. So Taya is the director of the Seymar Museum of Chicano, Chicana, Latino, Latina culture, and also the health center administrator of the Seymar Adolescent Medical Clinic, because if you're in the heritage field, you have to wear many hats. So before coming to Seymar, Taya worked in museums in Tacoma and Seattle and St. Petersburg, Russia. And Taya is also a member of Seymar's new Diversity, Equity, and Anti-Racism Committee. Now, the new Seymar Museum is the first museum in the Pacific Northwest that's dedicated to telling the stories of Washington's Latinx and Chicanx communities. And as a project of Seymar Community Health Centers, Seymar, the museum, shares a building with an adolescent medical clinic team. Then together they're working to better help with physical and mental health outcomes for adolescent patients. It's pretty impressive. And as Taya herself has told me, that her goal is to create a safe and community space that will encourage everyone to recognize the significant role of both medical and behavioral sciences, but also educational, cultural, and heritage services, how those would play in the health and well-being of individuals and communities. So today, Taya is going to be talking about community and inclusivity, and hopefully be able to provide some lessons learned. So if everyone could, a nice, warm, quiet welcome.
All right. Hi, everyone. First, I just want to thank AKCHO for inviting me to be the keynote speaker. This is a very cool experience for me. I love talking about my job, so this is definitely no hardship. So as Aaron already mentioned, I'm going to be talking about community and inclusion, but I thought I would take ruthless advantage of the fact that I have you all hostage here, and since the Seymar Museum is technically still closed to the public, I wanted to give you a brief history of the Seymar Museum project, and with some photographs, you guys kind of will be getting a virtual tour since we aren't offering those in person right now. So I thought I would start with that. All right, so the Seymar Museum of Chicano, Chicana, Latino, Latina culture has opened very recently. We opened October 24th of last year. So we only had a couple of months in there before the pandemic hit, but we got as much mileage as we could out of those months. And since then we're, we've had to shift a couple of things around, but we're still working on things. And fortunately, well, I'll get into the fortunates and the uniqueness of our position just now. So the Seymar Museum is a project of the Seymar Community Health Center organization, also with generous support from the Washington State Department of Commerce, the Washington State Historical Society, and of course, For Culture. Now, some of y'all may be familiar with Seymar CHC, Seymar the Community Health Center nonprofit. Some of you may not. So I wanted to provide you with an insight into this parent organization of our museum. So the Seymar Community Health Center, was founded in the late 1960s in the Seattle area. The idea of starting a community health center to directly serve the Latino population in Western Washington originated in a group of actually undergraduate Chicano students at the University of Washington. They were all living on the same floor in Lander Hall on UW campus. Together they led empowerment efforts to end the Vietnam War. They were involved in the civil rights movement. They directed several successful efforts demanding the hiring of Chicano faculty and the recruitment of Chicano students at the University of Washington. And these same students were also involved with the Northwest Chicano Health, a nonprofit organization that was dedicated to recruiting Chicano students for healthcare careers in Washington state. And through a study, they identified the Seattle area and found that none of the healthcare clinics in the Seattle area specialized in serving Latino populations. And this includes more than just offering Spanish language services. But because of this gap, they joined together with another group that identified the same need as in Marysville. And that's actually why we're called Seymar. A lot of people think that we're called Seymar because Mar is C in Spanish, but actually the C stands for Seattle and the Mar is short for Marysville, because the original vision was to have medical clinics up and down Western Washington, all the way from Seattle to Marysville. And so in 1978, Seymar Community Health Centers was born, and now we have 94 physical locations, 34 medical clinics, 26 dental clinics, 36 behavioral health clinics, 11 pharmacies, 31 women, infants, and children and maternity services sites, 2 long-term care facilities, 4 inpatient treatment centers, 4 affordable housing developments, and now 1 museum. So that brings me to the Seymar Museum. Now, the gentleman on the left is the CEO of Seymar, Rogelio Riojas. He was one of those Chicano students at the University of Washington who I mentioned first. He's a co-founder as well as current CEO of Seymar, and this museum was a long-standing dream of his. He had always put aside some part of his brain knowing that at some point he wanted to open a museum that was dedicated to sharing the story of the Latino and Chicano community in Washington state. And so this dream has been, discussed for more than 15 years at Seymar. There had actually been land purchased for this very purpose quite a long time ago. Seymar has owned the land that you see in this photograph here for more than 15 years. This land used to house a casino and a Hooters, which I always think is kind of funny. We actually have a phone booth from the casino still in the museum that we're hoping to use in creative ways. And this was the plan that was developed for the museum. It was envisioned to be a cultural center, so it was always envisioned to be a multi-purpose building. The building currently houses the Seymar Museum. On the second floor, we have Seymar's Spanish language radio station, KKMO El Rey. And then we also have a large auditorium and community center. So construction started about 3 years ago. And now the beautiful building is finally complete. And as I mentioned before, we opened October 24th of 2019. So I mentioned again, the uniqueness of our position as a project of a parent organization, Seymar CHC, that didn't have a lot of experience, had 0 experience in museum, in the museum field. It was, of course, primarily focused on healthcare services, but it also had dipped its toe into other educational services as well and cultural services. For many years, Seymar has hosted the festival Fiestas Patrias every year. It's held in the Seattle Science Center usually. This year it was done virtually, and that's a very large celebration that is dedicated to, many Latin American countries' Independence Days fall in September. And so every September, Fiestas Patrias kind of honors immigrants from these countries, and Seymar is also on hand to promote health and well-being in the Latino community, as this is an area in which the Latino community is very underserved in the region. We were fortunate to have a wonderful group of volunteers from in and out of Seymar. This photograph here shows a group of volunteers hard at work cleaning museum artifacts. Again, this museum was such a long-standing dream. We had started acquiring our collection starting about 7 years ago. So a lot of that stuff was in medical warehousing, and it needed to be moved. And so we have medical assistants and dental supervisors and many other people who volunteered their time because they thought heritage services and cultural services was such a cool and unique branch that Seymar was entering into. But if you really look at Seymar's trajectory, it should come as no surprise that a museum was kind of the next step in our educational and cultural services. So we just started developing. Guys get an inside snapshot on what the museum looked like before it was beautiful and done. And again, you know, we had items that had been in storage for a number of years that needed a lot of love and attention. And again, all of that that hard work was done mainly by volunteers and pre-existing Seymar staff who had no experience, possibly no interest before this time in working in the museum field. And so it was an all hands on deck moment. And it was really wonderful to be at the beginning, at the dawning of a new museum. That's a pretty rare occurrence. And so I felt very fortunate to be there. So that was a long-winded way of getting us to the mission of our museum. So the mission of the museum is to share the Chicanx Latinx migration experience and history through a social justice lens in order to cultivate pride, appreciation, and understanding in Chicanos and Latinas' significant contributions in the state of Washington. Now the illustration that you guys see on the right, that's the first panel that visitors see when they enter the museum. And I like to tell tours when they used to come in before the pandemic, that if they read nothing else in the museum, and if they left the museum remembering nothing else, as long as they remember this main statement, I would be very happy, because this is our main concept statement, and it just is titled An Ongoing Journey. The Chicano and Latino community plays an important part in the shaping of Washington state. Their successes and struggles are generations old. Now, the reason why I like to highlight this is, as Erin mentioned, the Seymar Museum is the only museum of its kind in the region. There is no other museum dedicated to sharing the stories of the Chicano and Latino community, the struggles, the sacrifices, and the significant contributions that this community has made to Washington that often go untold, unrecognized. And so this is the beating heart of the museum, sharing these stories. Now, the museum is made up of two parts, the rotunda area here, and the rotunda area is, as you can see, it's meant to be kind of the most dramatic visual of our museum. You enter and there's a recreation slice of life of migrant farm working housing. Everything in this area is authentic to the period and the region. The cabins, the truck, and the tractors were purchased from a migrant farm working camp in Sunnyside, Washington that closed down. And those cabins were actually lived in as recently as 1989. So, oftentimes I ask groups, when do you think people inhabited these houses? And I'll get a lot of 1940s, 1950s, but it was as recent as 1989. And so I like to use that to make people think a little bit. Here's just a glimpse. I mentioned that I was going to be giving you guys a mini tour. So this is your chance, since the museum unfortunately is closed to the public now. We do allow visitors inside the cabins. This caused a lot of debate when we first enacted this policy, a lot of back and forth. I wasn't sure how I felt about it at first, but the feedback we got from visitors was so positive that I had to come around and agree that allowing a limited number of people inside the cabins was worth it. And then the rotunda continues up a walkway that continues the story of the Chicano and Latino community from the initial influx of migrant farm workers in the 30s and 40s to their children who came of age in the 1960s. I'd mentioned before, those children were the very people who founded the Seymar Community Health Center organization. They're depicted here. This was an anti-Vietnam protest that they orchestrated that went from the Seattle UW campus all the way through downtown. And so that is kind of the segue walkway that takes you to the South Gallery, which is the larger and final part of the museum. And you guys will get just a glimpse here. I'm sorry that I can't give you guys an actual tour, but the South Gallery is divided up into different sections. There's a section on labor that significantly focuses on the contributions and experiences of the Chicano Latino community in the agricultural industry in Washington state. There's a section on the Chicano movement and the impact that the Chicano movement had in Washington state specifically. There's a section on culture. There's a section on military veterans. I always like to highlight that section because Hispanic military veterans often literally go unrecognized in history books. So it's something that we felt needed to be prominent. We received a lot of donations. This doll here, this box was actually already pre-done. This was donated by a family of a participant, a member of the UFW, the United Farm Workers Movement, Cesar Chavez's union. When it came to Washington, one of the first Washington Union members, his widow donated this box, and we have this on display. Chicano Power, I love this patch. I think this is a really powerful image. And then we also have other sections on Latino Chicano culture. So here we have an ofrenda, an altar that's traditionally exhibited during Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead, in which we honor and remember family members and friends that have passed away. And then we have some baile folklorico dancing costumes that were donated to us from a dance troupe called Bailadoras de Bronce that actually was started in Seattle in the same year that Seymar was started in 1978. We have a long-standing, they actually use our auditorium for their practices. So it was wonderful of them to donate these beautiful costumes. And then we have a wall on the migration experience, and that's something that we're currently working on adding audio and visual component to. That's something that kind of stalled during the pandemic, but we're working to get that going again. And then this is the auditorium I spoke of. This is the section of the museum that is available for rent by the public. So it was made very clear from the beginning that this part of the museum was going to be available to the public, whether or not they wanted the museum portion included. Before the pandemic, we had a wedding reception, a quinceañera, a college graduation, a kindergarten graduation, as well as we hosted Seymar's annual Cesar Chavez Social Justice Festival. And then, of course, we also had our grand opening. Here's Governor Inslee cut the ribbon at the museum's grand opening. I wanted to call out some significant contributors to the museum. This is Professor Erasmo Gamboa. He was an American Ethnic Studies professor at the University of Washington. He was another one of the original Chicano UW students who participated in the founding of Seymar, and he went into history and academics. Bailadoras de Bronce, they performed at our opening, and that was very wonderful. And we had more than 1,000 people wind up coming to the event, which really demonstrated the South Park neighborhood has always been a predominantly Latino neighborhood. That was part of the reason why Seymar had purchased the land to begin with. It was the neighborhood that Seymar's very first clinic was opened in because it was the area they had identified that need. So we were very fortunate to be able to have the land for this museum. And a lot of these people just walked by. They hadn't been aware that it was happening, and they saw there was an event going on, and they wandered in and wound up staying. And then this is just the final. I love this photograph. I'd like to end on that. We've had a couple of fun visitors. Former presidential candidate Julian Castro actually came by the museum, and he wound up being, he was very knowledgeable. His mother is from Texas and very involved in the Chicano movement there, so he was shaming a lot of our knowledge, which was, that was wonderful conversations we had. This is Washington State Representative Bill Ramos. He came by for a tour. And a quick overview. Before the pandemic hit, we closed in March. Almost 2,000 people visited. We averaged daily about 22 people. Programming is free. Our hours are Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. And since the pandemic, we have shifted to virtual programming. And so that means either, most recently, we worked with the King County Library system and SoCo Culture in their Bookmarks and Landmarks event, where they pair a librarian with a historical site or landmark like the Seymar Museum, and both sites select a book and then host a book club and other virtual programming. So if you guys are interested, you can take a look at the Seymar Museum page. We still have that programming online. You guys won't be able to take part in the book club discussion that Mayor Jimmy Mata actually participated in. That wound up being a wonderful conversation, but our online resources are still there. And then we're also working on shifting to virtual school field trip guided tours. That's something we're working on. Before the pandemic, that was something we averaged about 2 large group tours a week of from schools, and that's something that I've really been missing. I conducted those tours and developed the programming, and I really miss that. That's a big gap in my week. So I look very much forward to when we'll be able to conduct those tours in person. We got some wonderful feedback from schools. We made sure to reach out to various high schools throughout the region, including Latinx clubs and Latinos Unidos clubs that are specific, extracurricular clubs that are focused on servicing the Latinx and Chicanx youth at those schools. And we had some really positive, wonderful feedback from these students. They were very into selfies. Unfortunately, there are some spots in the museum that are wonderful selfie spots, like the mural with Cesar Chavez and Martin Luther King is, I think, the most popular selfie spot in the museum. And then, of course, I just wanted to include some letters that we got from a 5th grade group because I just loved, I'm sure the teacher helped them with a lot of what they said, but I still really appreciated the effort. This letter says, "We enjoyed learning about Chicano and Latino culture. Something we want to remember is how many people fought for better conditions for Chicano and Latino people." And then this one, I like this one because he made sure to point out how awesome the mariachi suit is. And he's not wrong. The mariachi suit is pretty awesome. But in yellow, it says, what I learned is that huelga means strike in Spanish. I also learned that children were fighting for equal rights to get what they wanted, which is wonderful. I mean, that's something where this was a group from a predominantly white middle school. And again, this is where museum visitors find relevance when it hits them. And so, these children were able to identify with the stories and have empathy very easily. And that's something that speaks specifically to something I wanted to share with you guys, which is our museum visitor goals. This is something we developed before the museum opened. And so just as a takeaway, we wanted visitors to leave the museum with an increased interest in and desire to become involved in contemporary issues, particularly those related to social justice that face the Chicano and Latino community in Washington State. And when I give tours, I end on a quote that we have above a wall by Dolores Huerta, and it's an incomplete quote, but it says, "Walk the street, get off the sidewalk, walk the street with us into history." And so I usually always end my school groups with, what would you get off the sidewalk for? Is that something you're passionate about? Then get off the sidewalk and participate for it. The rest of the quote that we didn't include on the wall, Dolores Huerta went on to say, "Don't be a marshmallow." So I like to end these school tours with telling these kids, don't be a marshmallow, get off the sidewalk. Think about what you would get off the sidewalk for and then go do it. Another museum visitor goal is just an increased awareness of the culture, history, and legacy of the Chicano Latino community in Washington State, a greater appreciation for the struggles and sacrifices, greater appreciation for the successes and contributions that Chicanos and Latinos have made in Washington State. And then, of course, finally, visitors who identify as Chicano or Latino leaving the museum with a greater sense of pride and knowledge that they may not have had. A lot of feedback we got from high school students especially was they didn't know much about the Chicano movement at large, versus let alone the Chicano movement in Washington State specifically. Some of them didn't have any information about who Cesar Chavez was, things these aren't regional things. This is something this is a national Chicano legacy but they were excited about it. They're asking, why weren't we taught these things? So this is one of our goals. And then, of course, visitors who don't necessarily identify as Chicano or Latino will still leave better able to identify. And that's something that I think we were successful with the schools and hopefully with individuals. One of the most meaningful things that I learned since I started from this museum was the uniqueness of our position. I do genuinely believe that the Seymar Community Health Center organization is uniquely positioned to enable the museum to fulfill its mission, which is to serve the underserved. The Latino population is fairly unrecognized in regional museums, and this is something that the Seymar Museum is very excited about, the unique position that having our parent organization of Seymar Community Health Centers, which is a very long established organization that is very trusted in the Latinx community in Washington State. That is something that I always try and recognize. But this quote by the CEO of Seymar, Rogelio Riojas, the first time I heard it seems obvious and it's also not obvious at the same time, but it's just, we recognize the role that heritage and culture play in health and the well-being of communities. And when you break that down, it's just an extension of Seymar's services. All right, that we focused on health services, and then we focused on housing services, and then we focused on legal services, and then educational services, and then cultural services. And what's the next step of that? A museum brings a lot of that together, and heritage and culture play a significant part in health and well-being. And so it's not outside of the realm of understanding for a museum to have a clinic in the same building at the same time, because they both serve the individual in different ways that are very necessary. And so, I know that Aaron had mentioned, talking about, lessons that you guys can take away from our experiences, and lessons that I learned in my experience at the Seymar Museum. The first thing I wanted to highlight was the role that public health played. This may seem out of left field, but stay with me. The role that the public health side of what the community health center model, the influence that that had on me was quite significant. So basically, I won't go into details, but the public health model is all about assessment. No public health planning, a community needs assessment is not going to do any implementation before there is an assessment. They're not going to determine any resources, any training, any staffing until an assessment has been done. And public health assessments are very, very nitty-gritty. So the public health model is I wanted to come up with a parallel in the museum world, and the parallel is straightforward. It's the front-end evaluation within museum evaluation. So the public health model that I'm talking about is very front-end evaluation heavy. And the Seymar Museum has emphasized the fact that needs assessment before anything else. This is in part due to Seymar's expertise in community health assessment, its expertise in data collection, demographic analysis, which it does for its medical sites, community needs assessment, which it does for its medical sites. All of these skills equally well serve the Seymar Museum. And so we didn't do anything without assessment first. So I like to say that we were need-driven and not want-driven. So need, we identify as, a resource or perspective gap in the community. Want, on the other hand, would be something that we, the museum, have in terms of our capacity, our training, or our interest. So an example of this would be, we had some Seymar staff members who were very excited when the museum first opened, and they were part of Baile Folklorico and dancing, and they were excited about the adolescent clinic on the second floor, and they came up with this idea for we can have youth programming for dance. And we had the capacity, we have the space, we have the people, we have the staff, we have the people willing to put in their time, but we wound up not having with any interest from the community. Baile Folklorico troupe in this region, it tends to skew older, either the Bailadores de Bronce, that troupe, it's mainly adults, although they do have a young child section. We didn't get any traction from any of the youth in the area that we spoke to about this. There was zero interest. But on the other hand, what we found accidentally something that there was a great deal of interest in. We have that large auditorium, and Seymar has a youth boxing club, and this is something that's separate. They've had for many years, and they just moved out of their old facility and are waiting to move into a new facility. And so in the meantime, they wanted to have their championship tournament in our auditorium, and we did it, and we put up a big banner that announced the Seymar Youth Boxing Tournament. They had the tournament, it was great, and then we accidentally forgot to take down the banner for a couple of weeks. And what wound up happening was people from the neighborhood would walk in and ask about the Youth Boxing Club, and they asked, is it connected with the museum? Is the museum doing something with boxing? And so whereas the dancing programming, that was all internally driven. There was internal passion, there was internal training, there was internal interest, but there was no external interest. Whereas boxing, we discovered there was tons of external interest. And so we had already had a fairly limited section of the museum in our leisure and culture section that was dedicated to boxing as a part of Latino Chicano culture, but we thought we can expand this. And so we reached out to the Seymar's Youth Boxing Club, and we're in works to expand that part of the museum. So that's an example of us utilizing the public health model, which is really just evaluation, to really service the needs of the community and not the internal wants of the museum. Another lesson, and again, this is really being informed by the fact that that Seymar started as a community health center. This is trauma-informed care. Now, again, broken down, trauma-informed care is just the awareness and sensitivity of services to the fact that many people have a history of trauma that will impact their experience with services being provided. Now, typically trauma-informed care is applied to the medical industry, but I saw no reason why trauma-informed care shouldn't be applied to the culture and heritage industry as well. You know, at its very basics, all trauma-informed care does is promote a culture of safety, empowerment, and healing. And this is very similar to decolonization work that's being done in museums. So again, looking to something that Seymar, the Community Health Center, had expertise in, trauma-informed care, thinking, wait a second, there's a parallel that museums experience. We can apply a little bit of lateral thinking and come up with some unique results. So some principles of trauma-informed care include you know, finding ways to ask permission of your audience and your public, finding ways to offer control to communities that you seek to serve, and finding ways to support. And so, you know, I mentioned, you know, decolonization being a factor. This is something that the Seymar Museum is relatively fortunate to not have too many issues with, because we aren't a long-standing museum. We hadn't been a collecting museum for very long. The majority of our items had been donated by family members of Chicano and Latino communities in Eastern Washington. And so this is something that we could just take a fresh perspective at, but still always realizing that, you know, museums will essentially always have some colonial aspect because they're about possession and protection in some way. But, you know, we still want to, you know, break through that and think about how to be accessible and inclusive and engaging and reciprocal in all the right ways. And so just to drive home the fact that trauma-informed care was made for the museum industry, I found this this infographic on the CDC training site for trauma-informed care, and this epitomizes everything that I know museums want to work on: creating safety, developing trustworthiness and transparency, peer support, collaboration and mutuality, empowerment, voice and choice. You know, cultural, historical, and gender issues. Again, to a medical field, some of these things might take more work and be surprising, but to the museum field, this is all stuff that we're all very well acquainted with. And so the Seymar Museum just approached it from a little different angle. And, you know, because when you think about the perceived power differences between, you know, patients and doctors and nurses in clinics, and how similar they are to the perceived power differences that visitors can experience between them and a museum. Museums can often be presented as the ultimate voice of authority and control. In the medical field, it's described as this leading to anxiety, flashbacks, and avoidance, but very similar consequences can be had in the relationship between a visitor and a museum. Anxiety and avoidance are things that museums should be aware may happen if they don't keep, you know, in mind the open-mindedness and compassion and empathy that informs trauma-informed care. You know, all people, you know, deserve that amount of open-mindedness and compassion, because anyone can have a history that impacts their experience with a museum system. You know, I'm sure that everyone has had some experience in a museum where they think either this museum, this particular exhibit or object maybe isn't for me or isn't about me, or is being presented in a way that I'm having a negative experience with, and I may leave with a colored view of the museum's authorial voice. And so, you know, we, as the same way that medical sites need to know this, museums need to know how to avoid recreating these negative experiences while also promoting safety and empowerment. So the final example I wanted to give from the museum is a section that, you know, exemplifies promoting choice, empowerment, and self-determination. Specifically in our exhibit language. This was a section that I fought really hard for. Initially, there was going to be minimal text in the rotunda area, the area with the cabins. It's quite dramatic visually. We had wanted to emphasize the dramatics of that visual aspect and have more text later, but I fought for a panel that you kind of can't avoid when you first enter, because I really wanted people to be familiar with the language. So initially the discussion was of definitions. Well, what does Chicano mean? What does Latino mean? What does Hispanic mean? These are things that a lot of people aren't too sure of, and we want to make sure that everyone's on common ground. But then the idea of definitions came under attack. Well, wait a second, you know, these words are all about identity, and identity in large part comes down to choice. And so the language that we used was, what words do you use? So we have these flip-up panels that ask questions like, do you or your ancestors come from a Spanish-speaking country? You flip it up, and the language we use is, if yes, you might consider yourself this, or if yes, the US government would consider you Hispanic. Because we know that, you know, for example, Latino, technically as Mexican-American, I could identify as Latino, I could identify as Mexican-American, I could identify as Chicano, or I could choose to identify as none of those things. And so we wanted the language to be clear that this was about choice and self-determination. So my final note on this is just coming back to inclusivity. You know, inclusivity doesn't just mean without exception or promoting equity and diversity. To me, it also means being relevant and meaningful to the participants. So just because you're mentioned may be inclusive, but if it's not a meaningful mention, if it's not, then it's what use is that type of inclusivity. So, you know, to leave you with, so just some final inspirations. I just wanted to throw these in here. As a former teacher, I like giving reading lists. So I just wanted to recommend, you know, Paulo Freire's very famous Oldie But Goodie, The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, Nina Simon's The Art of Irrelevance, and then Of Bind for All has some wonderful toolkits and recently published steps that I found very illuminating in my pursuit of inclusivity and equity and the community-centered model that the Seymar Museum is all about. But I want to thank you all for this opportunity to address you at the AKCHO membership meeting, and that's my presentation. So I guess question and answer time.
Well, I just had one thing. I can ask you a million questions, but what happens whenever you shift to a question of need? When you start considering, what do our people need? Or in the context of the museum, what does the visitor need? What happens when you allow that to be the question that you ask first?
So we had that's a good question, because we had a lot of trouble at the beginning. At the beginning, the way we wanted to approach everything was, what can we do? It was a self-interested position to be in. We had certain limited capacity, especially in terms of staffing, and we knew that our capacity was only so much. Our capability for certain things was fairly limited. So we were, you know, using a fairly parochial approach and going, what can we do? We can do this because we have this, this, and this. But then, you know, as in the example that I mentioned with the dance versus boxing, it was revealed to us, and we had gotten not that far, but we had put in some work on the dancing programming before we just took another look at the data and realized this could be wonderful programming, wonderful content, and if it's not going to be meaningful for our audience. You know, they may participate, it may not be a terrible number of people participating, but it's not going to be as meaningful to them because it's not going to be self-identified need. That's something that I think we really saw after the opening. We had a lot of people coming in being very vocal, saying, I didn't even realize this was something we were missing. I didn't realize I had a mom come in and say, you know, I never realized what my children weren't seeing when they went to other museums. And then I came here and I realized they weren't seeing themselves. They weren't seeing me. And so I'm trying to think of another example of something that was need, that was kind of the public health model, need driven in terms of recent development. I mean, so the Seymar had conducted this annual event for, I think, about the past 10 years, this Cesar Chavez Social Justice Festival. And that's something that wasn't tied to the museum, but once the museum was open, we felt very strongly that the museum should be the host, not just because we have the space and the capacity, but because the agenda of that social justice festival so served the museum's mission, and the way that the social justice festival arranged speakers and guests and how they got, and it had to, they arranged their guest and invite list. It was done, you know, in the public health model, very data driven. So the guest list was initially just geographic. It was the South Park neighborhood. And then we had worked with the South Park Community Center using their mailing list. And then we'd reached out to a couple of other nonprofits that we have close relationship with, like El Centro de la Raza, and gotten their mailing lists. And then we had flyered other organizations and things that we felt strongly about. You know, our medical and dental and behavioral health clinics wound up being a big source of engagement in that particular festival. And that was engagement that the festival hadn't had before, because they hadn't been thinking about it in terms of a museum event. They've been thinking about it in terms of an ongoing thing in which it's a fairly regular rotation of speakers, but they had big picture thinking, and then went back to the public health model that Seymar was already familiar with and thought, wait a second, we can use this here too. So that's a more recent example. I'm not sure if that answered your question, Aaron, about need driven, but.
No, it absolutely. We actually have a question. Wanted to hear a little bit more about the Seymar's Diversity, Equity, Anti-Racism Committee. So I wonder if you could speak a little bit about that.
Yes, so this is something that I'm very, very pleased about. So Seymar had a cultural competency and diversity committee for a very, very long time. This is something that, it was in one of my previous slides, but Seymar CHC has always been predominantly a minority employed company. I'd say it's averaged between 50 and 60% annually. Seymar employees tend to identify as Hispanic, Latino. And this was something that had been part of the original mission, was to serve the Latino population by Latinos. This was something that was very serious. And so there had been a cultural competency training program that had been in effect for, I'd say, more than 10 years, and the committee had rotated on and off. But this upcoming year, I'd say in February, the decision was made that the committee needed to rethink itself, and really it needed to be not just more topical, more relevant. It needed to be inclusive in terms of the actual being meaningful and relevant in terms of what it's addressing, no longer just focusing on employee training, but really focusing on making sure that Seymar to the public was being seen by the public as, you know, as a safe space. This is something that medical clinics are very familiar with in terms of signage. You know, we can promise confidentiality. No ICE agents will be able to, you know, take you from our clinic. You know, we report your demographics to the federal government for funding purposes because we're a federally qualified health center, but they don't get any of your contact information, and we don't disclose anything. This is a safe space. If you are a runaway, all these other things that medical clinics have experience with, they decided to transform. Social justice has always been at the heart of Seymar anyways. It was started by advocates in the 1960s. And so they just decided, wait a second, this committee needs to be more than internally employee focused. It needs to focus on the public interface with Seymar, and Seymar being seen as a leader and adding its voice to the chorus of voices that are protesting, you know, police brutality against African Americans, and the use of language that that various elected officials use to dehumanize and others. This is something that Seymar decided to take seriously in a different way. Seymar has always taken this seriously and been an advocate and done various things like the Social Justice Festival that they've been holding for more than 10 years. But this committee, we decided we wanted it to be more than just, as I mentioned, more than just internal, have it be external. So they changed the name, and the mission was now focused on the public and not just Seymar employees. I hope that answers the basic question about the committee.
Yeah, what with this committee, are you making more, are there plans to make more connections with other institutions outside of the?
That is a wonderful question. Initially, we had been I would say yes, that's part of our long-term plan. That specific committee hasn't reached out. Funnily enough, through the museum, you know, through the museum's contacts with the Washington State Historical Society and other, you know, museum and cultural and heritage organization alliances, had reached out to the museum and not the Seymar Community Health Center to throw in our voices, you know, when we were drafting the reopening plan. And there was a lot of discussion about, do we want to add in the reopening plan a discussion about, let's call it cultural competency. Do we want to add some language about creating safe spaces in addition to the reopening language in terms of confronting the COVID pandemic? There had been a lot of back and forth about, wait, do we also want to add language in addition to, you know, addressing the COVID pandemic, addressing the racism that was on the rise? And that was discussed, and then it was that particular project was refocused on a reopening document, but that was something that the Seymar Museum had gotten outreach from, but the Seymar Community Health Center hadn't. So the long way of saying no. It had taken the Seymar and the DEAR, it's called the DEAR, it's the Diversity and Anti-Racism Committee. We haven't turned our attention to that yet, unfortunately.
Okay, I think we probably have time for just one more question. So if anyone would like to, I don't see any more in the chat. So if anyone has anything burning to ask, feel free to unmute yourself and ask. And
I noticed that Chris had asked when you think you'll be open again to the public.
Yes, so right now our position is that we'll reopen when King County enters phase 3. So technically museums can open in phase 2, but in terms of our capacity, I just didn't want to put us in a position where we'd be stretched any thinner. So we decided that the museum would reopen in phase 3. The Safe Start phases are currently on pause, as you guys know. King County has been stuck in phase 2 for a while. But that's giving us time to catch our breath, to focus on the virtual programming, the school field trips that I'm working on. But, you know, we're a very small museum, so our Seymar parent organization makes us seem big, and in certain ways we are big, and in other ways we're very small. And staffing, I'd say we're very small.
we'll continue the conversation, I think, after we do the awards presentation, but we want to make sure we keep the train moving.
I just want to thank you again, Tia. Many of us, we try really hard to make sure that we represent the communities where we are, but you've really shown us what it's like to be an integral part of your community. So thank you for doing that. Before we start the awards announcements, I just want to again reiterate that these awards represent only a smaller portion. A small portion of all the outstanding work that happens in King County. Some of you I know that are on the call aren't getting awards, but you've done great work, and everyone really appreciates what all of our colleagues are doing. So we're going to start with the Board Legacy Award, and that recipient is Jacqueline Lawson. In 1997, Jacqueline Lawson was the founding member of the Black Heritage Society of Washington State, where she remains fully supportive and engaged to preserve the legacies of the African Americans throughout the region. Ms. Lawson has gained a reputation as a respected public historian and is credited with developing best management practices and museum standards for the BHS archives. Just because she needed more to do, in 1995, she co-founded the Black Genealogical Society Research Group in Seattle. And Ms. Lawson made her own history when she became Seattle's first Black certified genealogist. She is the published author of 6 books and numerous articles in a curriculum, Genealogy 101. She fostered relationships between BHS and MOHI that is now a 20+ year community partnership that shares common ground and mutual admiration. Though semi-retired from BHS collections, Ms. Lawson's voice and reputation remains strong. She continues to act as an advisor, researches family histories, is immersed in genealogy, and continues to write historical accounts to document the local African-American footprint, and really shows us how sense of place is at the root of what grounds us. AKCHO is among many organizations that recognize the outstanding contributions that Jackie has made. In 2019, the American Association for State and Local History recognized her with the prestigious Lifetime Achievement Award.
Wow.
Yeah, so Jackie, all we can say is thank you for your selfless contributions over the years. You truly make a difference in our community.
Woohoo! Woohoo!
Right. We'll have time for her to talk a little later, as will the rest of the other award recipients. The Charles Payton Award for Heritage Advocacy is presented to the Maritime Washington Historical Heritage Area Committee. It's a long name, you're going to hear it a couple of times. But for initiating and developing a plan which has led to the protection of heritage resources. Established in 2019 as a result of nearly 20 years of collaboration, advocacy, and feasibility studies, the federally recognized Maritime Washington National Heritage Area will encompass the maritime history, culture, and heritage of approximately 3,000 miles of saltwater shoreline in Western Washington. So that means it's included 19 federally recognized tribes, 13 counties, 32 incorporated cities, 30 port districts, countless historical societies, museums, sites, and vessels. Okay, so that's a lot. That's a lot to try to organize and get something done. So special thanks goes out to Allison Brooks, the Preservation Officer at the Washington State Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation, and Chris Moore, Executive Director at the Washington Trust for Preservation, or for Historic Preservation. They were responsible for that final push, that getting it to go to a proposal that actually was passed. Now, to put this in a little bit of perspective, before this legislation, there were no new national historic or national heritage areas designated in more than a decade, and none at the Pacific Coast. And of the 54 national heritage areas in the United States, none of the other ones focus on maritime or water-based resources. So the group's purpose is to emphasize the connectivity of Washington State's coastal areas, recognizing that, as the native Salish peoples always have, saltwater ties the region together. This effort will build public awareness of Washington's maritime heritage at the local and national level. It will encourage economic development through heritage tourism, provide an opportunity for capacity building for heritage organizations, and support for working waterfronts and promote environmental restoration. So just real quickly, it covers, Federal Way in Des Moines and Normandy Park and West Seattle and Vashon Island and Elliott Bay and Magnolia and Shoal and Shoreline and the Lake Washington Ship Canal and Lake Union and Portage Bay. So we just say thank you for all of those that were involved to really take on such a huge project to protect our maritime heritage. AKCHO's Heritage Education Award is presented to Delbert Richardson. Delbert has put together an impressive collection of artifacts and information about the African-American experience, which he takes to educational and community institutions throughout King County. His materials show the unflinching stories of slavery and racism, as well as showing the rich tapestry of cultures and heritage held by the descendants of enslaved peoples, and in the deeds, and cultures of communities of recent immigrants from African countries. They are joyful relics of family moments and everyday products invented or patented by African Americans, such as ironing board and a pencil sharpener. But there are also the crude reminders of the painful past, such as a runaway slave collar and branding irons. All of these are equally displayed in the Unspoken Truths African American Museum, whose mission is re-educating learners of all ages that leads to self-restoration and community healing. I think really the best way to summarize Delbert's work is to quote him. I want to inspire young people to know that regardless of what they've gone through, there is still an opportunity to achieve. This is what I found out. Africa is who I am. Inventions are what I'm capable of accomplishing. Jim Crow and slavery are two things that tried to keep me from who I am and what I could accomplish. And that's my story. Delbert, thank you for providing an opportunity to acknowledge and to learn from the past so that we can work towards healing.
Great job, Delbert.
Woohoo!
Make your ancestors proud.
Thank you.
The exhibit award is presented to the temporary exhibit In and Out, being LGBTQ on Vashon Island, created by the Vashon Island Heritage Center. More than a year in the making, In and Out, being LGBTQ on Vashon Island, beautifully explored the long, quiet history of LGBTQ people on Vashon Island, their challenges, contributions, and visions. The island hosts a rich assortment of families and individuals, some of whom will identify as LGBTQ. In and Out was curated by Ellen Kreitzman and Stephen Silha, who worked alongside museum board member and noted historian Bruce Hallman and exhibit designer Jessica Dwyer. Ellen and Stephen assembled a multi-generational advisory committee, interviewed over a dozen people, spoke with old-time islanders and newcomers, used questionnaires and a story circle for additional information. They researched articles and family histories, searched for films and videos, and gathered multiple photos, artifacts, and cultural, excuse me, artifacts to create a powerful and compelling journey through LGBTQ life on Vashon over the decades. The experience did so much more. It extended beyond the walls of the museum through related concerts, picnics, a queer film festival, art exhibits, panel discussions, social events, and more. Congratulations on an exhibit which had a strong impact on its community. The long-term project award is for the opening of the Seymar Museum of Chicano, Latino, Latina culture. And I'm really going to shorten what I'm going to say about this because I cannot compete with what they already told us. So, you know, it is important that they share this experience in the history through social justice lens to cultivate pride, appreciation, and understanding of the Chicano, Latino significant contributions in the state of Washington. So I just want to say congratulations on turning a dream into a reality. And thank you for sharing the stories of this important community group.
Woohoo!
Good to see the plaques arrived. The single day event, Filipino Heritage Day at Neely Mansion, was awarded the Single Impact Event Award. Filipino Heritage Day grew from a desire to recognize the local Filipino American community and the many Filipino farmers and field workers who lived and farmed at Neely Mansion and the surrounding area since the 1940s. This was a new partnership for the Filipino American Society of Puget Sound and the Neely Mansion. Together, they created a day of celebration and recognition in the year of the 125th anniversary of the Neely Mansion. Attended by over 300 people, the event celebrated Filipino arts, heritage, and culture. The event included vintage costume displays, performance by the local Filipino American community of Puget Sound dance troupe, and artists presenting displays and demonstrations of their unique works of art. This example really showed us how successful the power of partnership can be. The Technology Award recognizes the pairing of technology with local history. This year, the award goes to the Rainy Day podcast series created by the Mohi Youth Advisors. Each of the approximately 6 15-minute episodes of Rainy Day history highlights one object on display in Mohi to explore what stories it has to tell about what it means to be a Seattleite. The podcast series explores the history of objects that are personal and political, childhood treasures abandoned in times of war, a memorable discotheque marquee, protest art, and more, and examines the legacies that the events surrounding them have left for this city. These podcasts were entirely researched, written, and produced by the Mohi Youth Advisors. So it's 12 students varying in age, genders, and cultural backgrounds that live and attend schools across King County. Some of the students chose to focus on marketing with responsibilities such as designing the album cover, writing websites copy, and setting a marketing plan. Some students tackled research and writing show notes for each episode, while some wrote the scripts. Still others focused on the recording and production process, including hosting, writing music, and editing. Okay, we've got a bunch of talented kids out there. We'll have to see what they do in the future. The resulting project was a bold way to tell Seattle history. Released over the fall of 2019, the 6 episodes of season 1 make a case for the relevancy of history by highlighting the struggles of Seattle's historical people as they are mirrored in our city today. If you caught the reference to season 1, yes, there is a season 2, which turns out to be a great pandemic project. So it was good to see a way that the museum was extending digitally even before COVID pushed all of us into that direction. The Virginia Marie Falcons Award is AKCHO's Historical Publication Award, which this year goes to Paul Talbert, Karen O'Brien, and the Friends of Stewart Park for Wild Isle in the City. This book presents the encapsulation history of the land, wildlife, and people of an island-turned peninsula nestled along Lake Washington. It's almost 10 years in the making. The book shares rich historic images and even richer stories of the events and personalities that defined what we know as Stewart Park. The authors and researchers took on the task of presenting the unvarnished profiles of the park's champions, visionaries, and yes, even the scoundrels. It shares the important role the park plays among many cultures, including the stories of the trees, the water, and the wildlife that provide respite to many, and how people, past and present, have advocated for the protection of these same assets. Because of the work of Paul, Karen, and the Friends of Stewart Park, Wild Island City will, for generations, be the journal of record for a unique, beloved place in Seattle. There are 2 categories of individual achievement. We'll start with the Willard Jude Staff Award, which goes to Nancy Sograno McKay, Highline Historical Museum Executive Director. Since 2006, Nancy has been preserving the stories of the Highline area, She brings in the community to share the stories via programs and exhibits. But even before the opening of the Highline Heritage Museum, Nancy was creating award-winning exhibits. Awards include the Exhibit Excellence Award from the Washington Museum Association, and earlier the Exhibit Award from the AKCHO organization. Nancy led the transformation from the Highline Historical Society, which had a collection, into the Highline Heritage Museum, which opened in June of 2019. So now we all know that means she has double the work, because now she has a collection to take care of and she has a museum to run. Nancy has been giving bilingual presentations around Washington State on community engagement while promoting diversity with exhibits and collections care. For several years, Nancy shared her expertise as the exhibit design instructor for the University of Washington's Museum Studies Certificate Program, and as an intern mentor for students in both the Museum Studies program and the Museology program. She served on multiple nonprofit heritage and cultural organizations boards, including being on the For Culture Heritage Advisory Committee, Washington Museum Association Board of Directors, and the Washington Museum Association Registrars to the Rescue Team. Nancy, thank you for the positive impact you have had within the museum field. The Willard Jude Volunteer Award goes to Paul Schutoff, who has volunteered at the Holocaust Center for Humanity in various capacities over the past 10 years. As a docent, Carl has influenced thousands of students in the 5 years the museum has been open. He was one of the first to volunteer for this role. Teachers and students continually say that Carl is inspiring and engaging. His thoughtfulness, patience, dry humor, and intelligence make him an outstanding for all groups and ages. He also helps train new docents. It really takes a person who is uniquely compassionate, dedicated, and serious to work ultimately with the difficult subject of Holocaust. Thank you, Carl, for doing that. He's become an integral part of the Holocaust Center, both for his deep knowledge and ability to make visitors, Holocaust survivors, and the staff feel valued. He goes above and beyond in his willingness to support the work of the Holocaust Center and personally exemplifies the center's tagline, "Change begins with me." In 2018, Carl drove all over the Puget Sound region to talk with students identified as upstanders in their community. His enthusiasm to share their inspiring stories led to the inclusion of these young leaders in the center's remodeled permanent exhibit the following year. He attends every local teacher seminar and program the center offers, both as a participant and as a helper. Carl volunteers for the Holocaust Center for Humanity because he believes in the power of Holocaust education, and he knows that contributing his time matters. We thank you, Carl, for being an inspiration to the many lives you touch. Sarah Haycox is AKCHO's Youth Award recipient, and she has a unique community benefit story. When Sarah was walking through a park in Shoreline, she came across something curious. There it was, a stone with a tribute on a plaque. It said, Edwin T. Pratt, 1930 to 1969. Sarah gave herself the homework assignment to find out all she could about the life and death of Edwin Pratt. She learned he was the executive director of the Seattle Urban League and advocated for school desegregation and fair housing and job opportunities for the Black community. He and his wife, Betty, and daughter, Miriam, were among the first Black families to move to Shoreline, Washington. Civil rights leader Edwin Pratt was assassinated on the doorstep of his home on January 26, 1969. The small memorial, Sarah thought, was hardly big enough for a man who had so much impact on others. About that time, Sarah noticed that across the street from her school, the district was putting up a new early learning center. And then she found out it didn't have a name yet. So you can guess, her wheels started turning, and she put her efforts to make Pratt's name his work for passion and equality for all. And she went all over town with petition drives and school board meetings. And the Shoreline School District Board voted unanimously to name its new learning center the Edwin Pratt Early Learning Center. And it opened its doors for the first time on January 7th, 2019. Not surprising, AKCHO isn't the only person that recognized what Sarah has done. And so for her work for championing the life and work of Pratt, Sarah was the first recipient of the Edmonds-based Lift Every Voice Legacy Beloved Community Award. And in 2019, received a King County Martin Luther King Medal for Distinguished Service Award. Sarah, thank you for reminding us that great things can be accomplished when you follow your passion. So, wow. Those are awards. So yes, feel free to unmute yourself and clap if you want.
Yay, Sarah.
Right.
And yay, everyone.
Everyone.
All of the recipients, you've all done amazing things. And we know that, you guys aren't, a one and done thing. You've done great things before this. You're going to continue to do great things. So thank you for that.
And thank you, Alice.
You're welcome. I'm happy to serve.
You.
Yeah, thank you, Alice, AKCHO team, and for culture.
But what we're going to do is we're going to let all the award recipients that would like to talk. And just because in Zoom it's really hard to know who's going to talk when, we're going to do it in the order that the awards were announced. So I know Jackie was going to try to connect via phone with us. I don't know if she was able to do that or not.
I saw her name on there.
So Jackie, if you're
So I
there,
know
we would
she can
love to
hear.
hear from you.
Her beautiful daughter's on.
Well, if
Gwendolyn.
Gwendolyn wants to say something, or if Carol does, or if Stephanie does.
This is Gwendolyn Lawson Townsend. I'm Jackie
Woohoo!
Lawson's daughter, and I am so proud of her. I have learned so much from her. She is the griot of our family, and I'm not going to talk long because I do want Carol and Stephanie to chime in just very shortly. But I want to give my thanks for my mom for this award. Thank you. Carol?
Well, don't get me crying. I mean, Jacqueline Lawson and her daughter falls right from the tree. You talk about a brilliant mind. It's overwhelming. And I just, I'm grateful for her to not listen to me because I said I didn't want to be involved and she didn't accept that. And so I'm grateful because I've learned so much. I'm humble. Thank you.
And I would just add really quickly to that too. Jackie, I can't see you, but I know you're on. This is Stephanie, and you are my hero, my shero, my go-to, my everything at BHS. So I'm so happy for you and excited for this award for you. And I'm going to call you tomorrow.
Okay. Congratulations again, Jackie. You are truly an inspiration and have been for years.
Yes.
So, Chris Moore, the Charles Payton Award for the Maritime Washington Heritage area.
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, just a quick congratulations to all the recipients. It's really an honor to be recognized along with everyone. It's simply so gratifying to see the depth and breadth of work happening in the heritage field throughout the county. It's astonishing to me, the amount that's going on and all the creative and just wonderful work that's happening. So congratulations to all. We're really thrilled to, of course, have received the Charles Payton Award. We all know how much of a just champion for heritage Charles was during his time at Fort Culture, and it's really, really wonderful to see that legacy continuing with the great work that Chieko is doing there now. So certainly keeping going in that same vein. We're really thankful to AKCHO and to the committee and to Fort Culture for their support of this. The Washington Trust for Historic Preservation is named as the coordinating entity to manage the heritage area. But really, I think, and we're thrilled about that. We're really, really excited about what this is going to mean, not just for maritime heritage in King County, but throughout the region. But I really just wanted to provide a shout out to all the people that kind of got this set up. And Alice mentioned it was really a 20-year effort. It was back in 2010 when a committee was put together to develop this feasibility study that ultimately ended in the designation. And I'd really be remiss if I didn't go through that list of folks who served on that feasibility study. It was that document that really enabled us to get designation. And so real quick, that was Dick Thompson, longtime worked in government and was chair of the committee. Leonard Forsman, chairman of the Suquamish tribe. Chris Andreessen, who is a Kitsap County commissioner and also served in the office of Maria Cantwell. Chuck Fowler, who is with the Pacific Northwest Maritime Heritage Council and just about every other heritage-related organization throughout Puget Sound. Pat Lance, former state representative, also former Washington Trust board trustee. Former Senator Karen Frazier. Flo Lentz from Fort Culture, who I know all of you know well, formerly of Fort Culture and the preservation side of things. Jennifer Meisner, who at the time was my boss, executive director of the Washington Trust and now runs King County's preservation program. And Lita Dawn Stanton, who was with the city of Gig Harbor. And then finally, I wanted to just, two people mentioned Dr. Stephanie Toothman, who really served as a technical advisor. Stephanie was the associate director at the National Park Services of Cultural Resources, Science, and Partnerships. And then finally, Dr. Allison Brooks, who was a code awardee today. She unfortunately couldn't make it, but she's the director of the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation. And it was that agency in 2010 which sought state funding to help to get the study done. And, you know, I've heard it said that state agencies, you don't really hear much about state agencies unless something goes wrong. And this is an instance where something has gone really right. And I just want to make sure Allison, her agency, are acknowledged because they're such champions for cultural resources and for heritage throughout our state, and this wouldn't have happened without them. So thanks to everyone. I probably went over 2 minutes, Alice, but I tried to talk fast. So thanks very much. It's really an honor.
Well, thank you. And that whole group of people, thanks for calling all of them out, because we all know that was a big group effort.
Yeah.
So, Education Award, Delbert Richardson.
Thank you, Alice. Excuse me, I'll make this quick because it's late and I know we've all had a long day. I just want to show this amazing plaque, and I'm very, very appreciative. And I want to thank AKCHO for culture and all the family and friends that have taken the time to sign on. And I just want to share something that got this shingle from AKCHO earlier, and it says at the bottom, in recognition of his dedication to bringing African American heritage into the classroom. And so I really appreciated that piece there because it really speaks about the importance of our children being the carriers of the next. They are the future, and they will be the ones that transform this world. And so, Sarah, I appreciate you, and you've inspired me by your award. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And we all of us museums know that children are what it's about. We have to educate. So thank you for what you're doing.
And it's right on time, Delbert.
Mhm.
So the exhibit award, In and Out being LGBTQ on Vashon. I think Paul and Karen are both on, so you guys can decide who goes first.
Actually, it's Stephen and Ellen.
Okay, sorry.
And we're very happy to receive this award and to be in the company of all of you. Also, part of the inspiration came from Mohai. But I just want to say that the reaction to the exhibit, we had 650 people at our opening, and it has really opened up new conversations. I think it was a brave thing for the Vashon Heritage Museum to do. And just read a little bit of a poem that I wrote about the exhibit. In an old Lutheran church across from the fire station, our historical museum has been duly queered. Rainbows sprout from every wall, songs adorn the windows, gardens question grief and gender. Who knows what secrets might emerge in this space? Who knows what scents might coalesce from this quickening? This is a honeycomb of queer community. Feast on it, learn from it, criticize it. Let's all work to make life better for all. And that's it.
Okay, Ellen, is Ellen on? I can't see everybody, so. Okay, well, I'm going to assume Ellen has decided not to talk. If you're having any sort of technical problems, write it in the chat and somebody will help you. But okay. Let's see, what was the next award that in order there? It was the long-term award. Tia, you want to say anything more?
I've already spoken enough. Just a big thanks from everyone at Seymar.
Thank you. And thanks for the keynote. It was inspiring. So we have the Filipino Heritage Day with the Neely Mansion. Would anyone like to speak?
Hi, yes, I'm Carol Grimes, board president. And I would like to start by saying thank you to the Filipino American community of Puget Sound. They were our neighbors and our friends. And it was their interest in partnering with us that made the event so wonderful. We also would like to thank For Culture for funding this event. And last but not least, AKCHO for recognizing this important community partnering event. True to our mission, we would like to look forward to next year to continue sharing our stories and celebration of all of our cultural histories, the English-Irish, the Swedish and Swiss, Japanese Americans, and Filipinos, and also the indigenous coastal tribes. Thank you to the board members of Neely Mansion, all of our volunteers, our members, our friends, and we cordially invite everyone to join us in 2021. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. The Technology Award, Rainy Day History. Emily?
Hi, everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm here. I just wanted to say that the teens were so excited when they heard that they got this award, and they're super happy about it, and they're so proud. And it's just like put an extra gold star on their project. And it's, I feel like, a really great example of people saying yes to stuff and saying yes to youth voices and youth ideas, and just how powerful that can be. And yeah, it's just been my honor to work with the MOHA Youth Advisors and learn with them and learn from them in this process. So super, super grateful. Thank you.
Thank you. So now it is the Book Award. And that was where I got confused and I said Paul and Karen earlier. So Wild Isle in the City.
So yeah, I have a bunch of thank yous to do here. First of all, to AKCHO for giving us this great award. We really appreciate that. And you said this project began 10 years ago, but actually I began researching Seward Park's history 20 years ago. I heard that poison oak saved the magnificent forest from logging, which is a great story, but poison oak doesn't actually grow in the forest, only on the edges. So I became curious about how the forest was actually saved from logging. And I had to learn how to do historical research. I got help from Lorraine McConaughey at MOHI and Cole Thrush, who was then at University of Washington, Buzz Anderson at the Rainier Valley Historical Society, and Al Smith, a fellow member of the Friends of Seward Park. And of course, one question turns into many others as Al and I tried to reconstruct how the park came to be and developed to its present state. And turning all this research into a book was only kind of a vague notion until the park centennial in 2011, when an all-volunteer group of community members came together and decided that we should tell the park's story. So Patricia Killam put out a call for stories from the community, conducted interviews, and summarized the records of the Friends of Seward Park. Karen O'Brien, archivist extraordinary with the Rainier Valley Historical Society, came on board to assist with research and manage photos and design the layout. And nearly 100 people contributed a story, a poem, a critical bit of information, an interview, or a list of organisms to the text. We worked intermittently at odd hours between long gaps to bring the book together. So I won't name all those 100 people, but I do want to name all the valuable resources that we used, including the Rainier Valley Historical Society, the Seward Park Audubon Center, the Densho Project, the Duwamish Tribe, the Filipino American National Historical Society, the Friends of Seattle's Olmsted Parks, Frederick Law Olmsted National Historical Site, the Museum of History and Industry, the Hydroplane and Raceboat Museum, Seattle Municipal Archives, King County Archives, Puget Sound Regional Archives, the National Archives, Seattle Public Library, and the University of Washington Special Collections. And we'd like to especially thank the Lakewood Seward Park Neighborhood Association and For Culture for helping us fund to publish this book.
Wow. Doing all those resources means it was quite a labor of love for you to keep it all up.
Yeah. Thanks, Paul. I'll say a few things too. If you haven't been to Seward Park, this last, the COVID summer and our time of unrest, we had a record number of people in the park daily. There could be 1,000 to 1,500 people. And it's just a testament of our time to how much we rely on nature for our mental health and our well-being. I'm very thankful to have been part of this book. I grew up next to the park, and my mom is still lives in our family home, which she's been there for 67 years, and it's just right across the peninsula. So it's been Seward Park is a Seattle jewel and of an open space, and hope you can get there and look at the book is 336 pages, and the pleasure, the time that it took to research, select, and organize the book is something I'm very thankful that I had a part. It's an amazing learning experience. to learn and design and whatnot. Our project was 100% volunteer. I did want to thank For Culture, because graciously they extended our grant for, I'm not going to say how many years, but they believed that we could get the project done. Like Paul said, we worked in the wee hours of the night online. We were compiling the book together, and I'm just glad that I'm thrilled that it's finished, that it's out. We've sold almost 500 copies, and it's out there in the community so everybody knows what a great park it is. Thanks, Alice and AKCHO board for acknowledging our work. It is an honor, and I did want to say, Virginia Wright, you're amazing that you put all of this hard work into the virtual platform, and I appreciate all of your work you do behind the scenes. Thanks. That's it.
Thanks, Karen.
You're welcome.
Okay, the Willard Jude Staff Award, Nancy.
Hi, everyone. This one feels a little weird because it's actually my name. I always like the idea that I hate to use the word I. It's always we or we. So I never use the I. I do this, I do that. I always say we. And so for me to receive this feels just weird because it takes everyone to do it. Just to get you an idea, we opened the museum with only volunteers, with around 43 display areas. And since we opened in June 2019, we created on top of those probably more than 20 exhibits, and it's all co-curated, which means that I know what an exhibit design is. I mean, I know the process, I know how museums work when it comes to exhibits, but I'm breaking a lot of rules for us to actually do this. What I'm doing is that I'm really letting people speak their own voice. I'm barely filtering anything. And so when you see that place, that is their voices. So one of the things that I would like to acknowledge is that for me, in a personal level, it really takes a village for a museum to be raised. You know, that saying, African saying that it takes a village to raise a kid, but it's the same for a museum. It takes a village all the way from the funding opportunities for culture in King County to the families. I mean, it's so many different levels, and it requires all of us to be part of this. And I just want to say thank you for allowing the museum and also to be included my name in this to say we are in a community, we need each other, and I'm really happy to be part of this amazing group, and thank you for the opportunity. And I know it will sound weird, but I love you guys. I love the idea of having this group and being able to express our work and be able to share that, and knowing that it's truly to serve the community. It's not about just a museum. It is, and the end project is for everyone. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Next, we have the Willard Jude Volunteer Award, which is Carl.
Hi, everyone. I'm Carl, and I'm very, very grateful for this honor, this recognition. I thank AKCHO and the Holocaust Center for Humanity that's given me some wonderful opportunities in the years that I've been there. I think there's a lot of people out there who don't know us, who don't know that there's a Holocaust Museum in Seattle. We are located at 2nd and Lenora in Belltown. We are just about to reopen on a limited basis, but we've been around since 1989, and we serve about 40,000 students every year through museum visits. Our Speakers Bureau consists of Holocaust survivors and legacy speakers, their children and grandchildren who have picked up the mantle and are helping to educate young people about the lessons of the Holocaust. Very briefly, when someone comes to the Holocaust Museum, it's not really about just trying to understand or learn a collection of historical facts. We try to encourage this understanding by telling the stories of survivors and by looking at the artifacts that they've contributed to the museum. We present the Holocaust not just, again, as a historical atrocity, but as a case study in what happens when democracy fails, a case study in what happens when intolerance goes unchecked and when otherwise good people turn the other way. And just to give you an example, in the last 10 years, we've lost about between 60 and 70,000 Holocaust survivors. And by doing a little morbid arithmetic, that tells me that we're losing a survivor roughly every 90 minutes. And the young people that we are serving now, they will be the witnesses to the passing of the very last Holocaust survivor. And amid all this confusion and amid this chaos and uncertainty that we're living with now, I am hopeful that these young people have understood the responsibility that they've inherited to make sure that the lessons of the Holocaust do not get lost. So again, I thank AKCHO. I am eternally grateful to the Holocaust Center for the opportunities they've given me. And I hereby share this award with the amazing staff and volunteers at the Holocaust Center for Humanity. Thank you.
Thanks, Carl. Woohoo!
Okay.
Woohoo!
So we have our last award recipient, and last doesn't mean least important. We just, you have to have an order somehow. So Sarah, could you join us please for our youth award winner?
Hi, I would like to thank the Association of King County Historical Organizations for honoring Edwin Pratt through this award. This really was a community effort, and I'd like to acknowledge all of those who supported this project. I especially would like to thank the Pratt family, the Shoreline Historical Museum, the Urban League of Metropolitan Seattle, the Black Heritage Society, and the Shoreline School Board of Directors and Equity and Family Engagement Department. The Edwin Pratt Early Learning Center will ensure the future generations of Shoreline students have an opportunity to know about this local hero. Currently, my family and I are working with the Pratts in their efforts to have the Edwin Pratt's story included in the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C. Thank you.
Woo, 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 woo. Okay. So Sarah, you really set the bar high for us, I'll tell you.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah.
Great work. Thank you. Woo! We love you.
I want to work with you.
So I'd like to just sort of open it up for anybody who would like to express their thoughts on any of these, award things that they've, didn't get a chance to do their woohoo or whatever before. Don't want you to feel like you missed your chance.
Don't steal my woohoo. Just teasing.
I would like to say thank you. I came on to support a friend, and it's really been a blessing to see the work that you all have done. And I know, what Delbert's done with the Unspoken Truths, but you all have had equal impact in your areas, and I'm just really blessed to have been able to be touched by that, and I think, and I'm grateful that you opened it up virtually, and I think it's so important that others get exposure to all of the work that you all are doing, because it really does feel like a wonderful community. So thank you.
Okay, well, for me, I know that this evening has been, a time of celebration, yes, but also I just feel inspired that so much work has happened, and, we all try to embrace our dreams and our hopes, and to see what has materialized out of that is just really, really touches my heart. It makes me feel like, you know, we have this great community here of, you know, people who are really making a difference in their community and trying to tell the stories of their community and keeping history alive and learning from the history. So thank you to everybody. I'd be remiss if I didn't do some special thank yous again at the end, to the awards selection committee chair, Pat Filer, thank you, and the entire awards committee, to the AKCHO board, and to, of course, our sponsor, For Culture. And again, thank you for all of you, the award recipients and everyone, for all you're doing in the community. We're glad that you could attend tonight. It turned out to be pretty great having a virtual event, as it turns out. And we hope that you'll be able to join us at other AKCHO events. So enjoy the rest of your evening.